Good morning. This is Saturday, July 29th, 2023. This is the Natural Law Institute. We have a couple of us this morning. Brandon is still trying to get back from his usual party fest in Maine. Francis is, I don't know where Francis is, and everybody else is sort of busy. This is our first attempt at having office hours, which is where people ask us questions during the week and then we discuss them here. I suppose that since this is our first time, we'll be at it, and we'll get better at it over time. Though we'll try to keep it as at least minimally engaging. So we've collected, I think, 13 questions. Martin, is it 13 questions?
Yes.
All right, the first question.
Your audio is off.
My audio is off?
Now it's
fine.
Oh, I must be covering my. Sorry, I was covering my microphone. All right, so first question. This is via Francis. When will the staff complete the Constitution, and where can community members view it? Now, Martin and I did most of the work, right? Back in, is it 2020?
Maybe
Yes.
2019. I'm not even sure at this point.
Yes, it is all I think like COVID sort of ruined my time perception. It's because from the beginning of COVID to now is just like one blur because there's not enough environmental change, right? It's like one bad social media experience for the entire time. All right, so the Constitution outline is up there. Most of the major policy stuff is up there. Hello, Brandon. But I gotta stop talking so casually, informal. I've been working so hard to speak like a normal person instead of a CEO all the time that I've gone the other direction. Most of our content is already up on the site that has to do with the Constitution. At least the outline is there. Some parts, that was our first draft. We just sketched it out. We knew what the content needed to be. We knew what the policies needed to be. What's happened over the past year or 2 years is that we've worked on simplifying on making it more accessible to people. So right now we're sort of taking the strategy of working from our strategy, which is on the website homepage, over to the policy, the outline of the major policy changes, and then from there to the Constitution. And so we're actually following that workflow. There are a couple of difficult parts to doing that. The first is the sciences, which we weren't going to include originally, the first principles. We weren't going to include those, so we had to work on that. The second set is we had to get the strict construction of rights and obligations down. That's actually what we've been working on. As for most of the rest of it, it's actually pretty easy for us to do. It's these granular details that have been time consuming. So I suspect it's quite slow now, but it will increase in rate over time.
Yeah, it turned out even basics that we thought were pretty much done now, like reciprocity and testimony, there was a lot that could have been added.
Yes. So when you get down to writing stuff, excuse me, my allergy, hopefully my allergy medicine will hit me in the next couple of minutes. When you get down into, hey, Martin, how do we stop people from lying this way? What do we call it? You know, it turns out that there's a lot in there, right? I mean, it's work. And so some things that were previously a page long, now they're like 30 pages long, right? Some of these requirements. Because it turns out we're hella good at lying. At least the enemy is. And so to work on that was quite a bit of work. It wasn't the same working on the sciences. It's hard to get the first principles down, which is evolutionary computation. Because those things are the sort of the opposite. They're very simple principles that are just counterintuitive. And so that's turned out to be a little easier than we thought. But what makes the whole thing understandable is having them both, or at least those two things and the grammars. The first principles, the rights, obligations, and alienations, and the grammars. And so unlike our current constitution, which or whatever, we've strictly constructed basically it's kind of terrifying. Everything from the bottom up, from natural law of cooperation all the way up to what truth and reciprocity are, what all lying is, etc. And the really long list of the ways people lie, which is really disturbing. I mean, did you guys find it disturbing working on it? I mean, of course, I'm more emotionally attached to these things than you are. Did you find it disturbing how amazing people are at lying?
Well, I was able to add many of those forms because I was already disturbed previously.
Anyway, so if you go to our website, the way Brandon and I planned out the website is that it's structured pretty. Let me just share my screen. I'll share my screen. Hold on a second. I have to find a page here that's sensible to share. My website, my browser eventually crashed from memory overload the other day, so I lost some of my tabs and had to make them back together. Anyway, so here we are. I'm going to share the home page. And so what we've tried to do is create a pretty organized, reasonably organized plan. This is our plan. This is what we're going to try to accomplish. Right? This is crisis, solutions, and activism. And so then we get into the science of it for those people who want to know the detail. Then we go into the law, and the law is the Constitution. So if you want to go up into here, you can see this in whatever current state it's in. Then we have a piece on learning, how to participate, about us, etc. The search, because we were having problems with the home page, so we put the search on a different page here, etc. So most of the time, if you want to know about the law, it's all out here, right? It's our reasoning, the introduction, the declaration, all the chapters of the Constitution. And we have taken off the prosecutions for now, because that's probably too contentious until later. And then what a civil war will look like if we don't avoid it. So in that sense, you could go there, but if we go to, say, the courts, none of these things are complete, right? You can see all these stubs. So we have to work that out. We have to finish moving things into the Constitution, but we have to do it in a strictly constructed fashion. So we have to start out with rights, obligation. We have to start out with the laws of nature, the laws of man, the laws of language, natural law, right, and then how to produce the rule of law, and then rights and obligations. So this is a strictly, basically it's a science and a formal logic of cooperation. Anyway, does that answer the question, guys? Does that answer the question sufficiently?
Well, the question was how long it will take. I think well, definitely a few more months,
Oh, yeah, easy.
maybe a year.
Maybe a year. I don't know. We're doing all the hard stuff now. I mean, like when we talk about education policy, it's already 20 pages long. Right? We need to review it. And Martin has to shoot holes in it, because that's what Martin does. I put up my optimistic view of mankind, and then Martin tries to drag me back into grounded reality with his pessimism. I'm kidding. You're not going to respond to that, Martin? You're just going to let me get away with it?
That is true.
All right. So that's the first question. Where's the second one? Oh, my back is not happy. The second question. This is from Heimdallr. How can the broader community more effective at helping promote people's projects? I love people's enthusiasm. The best you could really do is refer people to Luke or Noah, or in the case of simply wanting to know, refer them to Martin and the Telegram group. Our goal is to get there, but there's always this tendency to jump the shark, right? And we've already done that once, and I don't want to do it again. So we're trying to just, we're thrilled that people want to participate, but you have to be pretty effective in order to participate. Maybe Gabriel will talk about this in a second. You have to be pretty competent to participate. The second thing is that until there's like the structure that we have put in place, and it's at least reasonably formal, which it ends up being confusing for people who come in, because it's not organized enough, because we're not really ready to launch. So I would say that if you know who the leading thinkers are, it's $5 isn't exactly he's not exactly a chump in these things himself. And so I don't think you could do much more than refer people to people. Like it's really clear who needs to go to Luke. It's really clear who needs to go to Noah. We have a place in the middle there we have to fill, right? Which is, and I keep trying to talk Luke into writing his next book on this, but I'm not gonna, Luke, I'm not gonna get there easily. He's not saying anything.
Not for a while.
So we do need the next step in between those two. So hopefully we'll get there. Okay, did I answer that question? I just want to be honest, is that you can't, what we're doing is rather complicated, and we want to make it so it's the least confusing and the least easy to reject by having it be as accessible as possible before we sort of launch. The reason we do this in public now is because everybody's so valuable in contributing to the project. I mean, I don't know how many people, how many people have contributed to this project? I mean, Brandon, how many people have contributed to this project over time? Huh? Oh, your sound is off.
100 more.
Yeah, it's a lot of people. So we like the participation is extremely useful. So even people who've come to the movement and left, that when they came to the movement, they added value, right? They still contributed. So we wanted all that participation, but we can't really we can't really go public, and it's difficult because you sort of want to share your joy, right? You want to share this and get other people involved because it's been so empowering for you. But
The
go ahead.
the intellectual portion, the academic portion of the work is
more precise, more difficult across more arenas as time pushes on. Right. That's why we're going to offer avenues of activism next, because you need to get your hands on this place and specialize in something that's real as opposed to across everything that's abstract.
Right, the theory is very broad, so it's not all actionable, right? And so the way to get involved in it is somewhat difficult. But if you, right, is that what you're saying? So what we want to do is ease the entry into the material by finding ways for people to participate in activism without having to understand the entire theory.
Yes.
Well, the theory is sort of theory of everything.
Mhm.
So it's a lot.
And say that again, that was brilliant.
So this is sort of a theory of everything.
Yes, so it's a lot. So I was going to ask you, Gabriel, how you're sort of wired for doing this, though, aren't you?
Probably. I mean, not any more or less than some of the other guys. I mean, I just interact more on Telegram and more usually. And well, I sometimes rewatch videos. I daily visit the website and read stuff up, to make sure that uh my answers are precise enough and they don't contradict,
Right.
the theory. So
Which they don't. He's really good. So it's work though,
yeah.
right? It takes work. And so what we want to find is a natural path for people who can organically get through the material to the best of their ability. Now, my view has been the theory is really fun for me and for other nerds, right? But the average person, they want something actionable. So Brandon and my strategy has been to give them activism to participate in, right? Which doesn't require knowledge of all the theory. It requires knowledge of how to get something in a domain, which is little beans. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, I think this might be easy. Maybe Martin and Gabriel could answer this one. How is it determined that blackmail is a violation of reciprocity? So this is a great question because we use blackmail as an example, as the most clearest example of why the non-aggression principle, as stated, is insufficient.
Blackmail isn't even voluntary if we include outright coercion and not just violent coercion like libertarians do in non-aggression principle.
Right.
Because I am still threatened with an imposition of costs on my interest, even if they're not physically interested.
Finish writing this up. I'd like to help you with that.
Luke, can you please mute your mic while you're not talking? Thank you. Yeah.
I muted it. I muted it. Go ahead. Say that again, Brandon. Michael. No. God damn it, Martin. How did you get muted?
No idea.
All right, go ahead.
So libertarians only recognize physical coercion as coercion, but I am still threatened with an imposition of costs when something like my reputation is threatened.
Right.
Because that will reduce my access to opportunities and yeah, and it's unpredictable because there's no outcome of the exchange where I benefit, and I don't have the option to just walk away from the exchange without anything happening at all.
Okay, so this is the test that Luke came up with that I didn't include in the original, and I think it's really. Let me see if I can unmute him again. Ask to unmute. Okay, he's muted himself. So Luke emphasizes that if you can't say no, it's not voluntary, which is a falsification area. Falsification, test of falsification. So I really like that test. So what we're trying, the one thing we want to get across to people is there's a tendency to want a single answer to a single test of a question of reciprocity. And I actually like the if you have to reduce it to anything is, can I say no? Right, that's pretty good. However, what we did is we produced a checklist. And so, and like in a lot of things that we do, there's a checklist of this is how court works. If you have to satisfy criteria, there's usually some checklist you have to cover. Well, we do the same thing in epistemology. Well, if in reciprocity, there's a checklist of things that you have to overcome. And so reciprocity is proposed as a checklist. So it's just a matter of memorizing the checklist, right? Productive, fully informed, warranted, voluntary transfer of demonstrated interests, independent, free of imposition of cost by externality against the demonstrated interests of others, and then more precisely within the limits of liability and restitutability. If you want to say, can I say no? That's a pretty good reduction, right? Can I say no and not bear a cost? I'm saying no. Because if you could say, well, you're bearing an opportunity cost. Well, I am, but that's if I choose to avoid the opportunity cost, that means it's not of value to me. That's the test. So I do like Luke's reduction, but in general, the message we want to get across is that there are just a few things you have to memorize like that. It's reciprocity, truth, and demonstrated interests. It'd be nice if you could remember the 15 steps in the ternary logic of cooperation. It'd be nice if you want to answer civilizational questions instead of just moral questions. But if you know those, if you memorize those few things, I mean, we get children to memorize fairy tales and all sorts of other stuff, right? You just memorize those things, and they're just checklists. And then what happens is over time, you get in the habit of using that checklist, and it becomes an intuition. That's the point I want to make.
No, and I have a caveat here that sometimes it may be desirable to reveal information that will destroy someone's reputation for public good.
Yes.
But then it's still a crime to ask for money.
Right, exactly. That doesn't, engaging in the crime of blackmail is still a crime. If the person, you say, well, this person did something and I'm going to make it public because this person committed, that's a duty, right? It can be a duty. It's the example we like to give is, should you tell on a woman or a man for cheating on their spouse? Well, if it's a one-off thing, do you want to ruin a marriage? So it's not worth it, right? If this person's being systematically taken advantage of, like that, then that's another thing.
Another thing is the question about whether the truthfulness of the information. I think it's pretty much irrelevant because regardless, the blackmail itself still incentivizes retaliation cycles, which is in the polity's interest to minimize.
That's right. Thank you. Gabriel just brought up the reason that law was actually instituted in the first place, is to prevent retaliation cycles. Because today we live in this world where there's lots of systems of insurance, like police and courts and other. But in the past, the insurer was you, your brothers, and your cousins, and your uncles, and the problem was that once you've gone and retaliated, now this is a private war, and this becomes retaliation cycles. or what we call feuds. And it turns out that in history, feuds used to be, I mean, they're basically small scale wars. Right? And feuds used to be incredibly harmful. All of a sudden, you've got children and without fathers and women without husbands and social destruction and higher burden on the productivity of people.
Yeah, I mean, laws against blackmail go back to Romans.
Yes. Okay, did we answer that one good well enough? Hey, Brandon,
I think so.
would you invite Brad to join this? Because I forgot to tell him that to shift our meeting this morning. Would you invite Brad to join us? The next one is, I don't know who this person is. It's
Well, he was on here.
what?
Well, he was on here, I think.
He's the first guy to come in.
Is the Gini coefficient of wealth inequality a good analogous measure of the concept of proportionality that the Institute speaks about? Presumably, if inequality is too high in a polity, some individuals will want to affect another.
Wait, Curt, you skipped a bunch of questions.
Did I?
Yeah.
Quite a few, yes.
How did I do that?
Well, you're anxious to get away from here.
No, that's not it. I'd rather hang out with you guys than anybody else. All right, Gabriel, will you do the next one?
What's the next one? 4, will the defeat of the enemy happen on Scripture's term? I have no idea what he means by that.
I'm not sure what's to do here about this one. Best I can say that, like Leviticus 18:28, the land will vomit you out. That may happen, yes.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That was brilliant. I don't like when they ask me what I believe. If I believe it and I haven't got the other guys in the Institute to agree with me, I'm not sure it means anything. I have to get, right, I have to, my belief has to survive falsification. Like as we get all the time, I'm a lot more forgiving than the younger guys are. So what does my belief matter? So Gabriel, would you try this one again? Number 5.
Let's see. Does Curt believe our moral duty is derived from us being rational beings? Is this utilitarian ethics or deontological theory? Why we need to act morally towards those who can offer nothing to society? I'm not really sure what he means when he with the words he uses in the first 2 questions, but when it comes to people who can't offer anything, they can't produce, they can't provide value, why would we act morally? Basically, if you do not, if let's say I cannot be sure that if something happens to me physically or when I just get old and I can't provide value, I will not be taken care of, then I have my incentive to defect increases. And also the same thing if, I don't know, just random chance of mutation happens and my kids are born with some sort of defect or whatever. And now I have to pay the full cost and I'm just basically thrown to the streets, at least my kid. That is not in the parents' interest, and so it also incentivizes defection. And so that's at the base level why you'd want to treat people who can't produce value, at least to give them some basic means of persisting.
I have an answer prepared for the other questions. That helps.
Wait,
Our-
are you moving on to the next question, or are you trying to?
no, for other questions in this one. So they were already answered in the chat. But this is for everyone.
I can't figure out what you're saying. Do you want to add to what Gabriel just said, or do you want to move on to the next question?
In this question,
Okay,
our theories are scientific and as such descriptive of laws of nature. Morality is an emergent property of cooperative groups, delineating what is for the benefit of the group and what harms it, particularly what produces retaliation cycles. Many cooperative animals demonstrate altruistic punishment against what they consider immoral behavior,
yes,
and rule of law is really codified and scaled up altruistic punishment.
that's correct.
Our moral duties are a way to return to the group from membership of which we benefit, such that we're not parasites. This isn't utilitarian because there's no attempt to maximize happiness, and such attempts always have horrifying results due to effectively justifying theft to increase happiness of some people. And it's not deontological, however, deontological ethics compatible with natural law and local norms will work for you just fine. Insurance of those unable to contribute isn't technically necessary, but it emerges due to preference that should we ourselves or our kith and kin become unable, we want that insurance to exist. That's what
Right.
Gabriel said.
That was smart. Who said that?
I did.
So, what did I want to pull out there? The broader abstract concept is that, are we insuring you against involuntary inability, or were we subsidizing you for unwillingness? Right? I mean, that's the difference. Are you, I mean, even if you're, I mean, it's the whole thing of, as long as you're not doing anything wrong, that's different from not being able to do good. What we care about is you're not doing anything wrong. If you're only, in other words, what is the minimum responsibility we require for insuring one another? And that is just don't do any harm. It's not like you have to be some great contributor, heroic contributor. They just have to do no harm. It's actually not difficult to do no harm. Most people will be charitable if you are doing no harm. However, if you're hiding behind doing no harm, like I always think about gypsy beggars, right? They're acting poor, but they're actually profiting from crime. No, that's a problem. And if you're a rent seeker, even if whether you're poor or you're wealthy, you're engaging in crime. So it's more important to not do anything bad than doing it good. And the reason this question is interesting is because it brings into focus the fact that we tend to overemphasize doing good instead of not doing bad. And what we're more interested in is don't do bad.
Destruction is easy. Line is easy, it's cheap. Destruction is easy. We're paying people to not destroy things. It's an easy thing to do.
Yes.
We're gonna run up against that limit on the other side. The competent are getting fed up and you're not paying them enough not to destroy things.
Yeah.
Well, that could easily turn into blackmail.
That could easily turn into blackmail, yes.
I really liked that question.
Well,
So did we answer the first part? I think you did, Martin.
I think we answered the whole question now.
Okay. Who just added number 6?
Well, I was throwing in other questions from various chats because at that point there wasn't enough.
All right. So who's gonna answer this one? Do I have to answer this one? I'd prefer. It's more
I-
I
interesting to
think we'll
watch
all
you
get
guys.
very similar answers.
What?
Very similar answers, I predict.
Well, would you mind taking a shot at it?
Sure. Explain operationalism. Operationalism refers to limiting of language to description of causality, which means basically changes in state. It produces a sequence of actions, meaning enforces description of cause and effect, avoiding obscurantism and suggestion, and basically deceit, all forms of deceit. It functions as a means of falsification because it tests whether or not we are talking what we are talking about actually can exist by basically constructing a statement consisting of the operational descriptions and basically
and that
avoiding
you can,
the
and that you
verb to be-
can, not only that it exists,
Yeah.
but that you can actually demonstrate it exists.
Yeah. Let's say it constitutes a large part of making sure you aren't just imagining things, talking about things you're just constructing in your head.
Mhm.
So that's basically it.
So, you ever go, remember when we were, I don't know if you guys did, we did diagram sentences
Yeah.
in school, right? It's like the most elaborate version of that. And all we're trying to do is say, do I actually know what I'm saying? Right? If
Yep.
I'm the speaker, and do you actually know if what you're saying? If I'm listening to you. So I think of it as like, if I said, what would that mean? If I fully expanded that sentence, it would mean, yes, I agree with your statement that Ted had a red ball in his hand that he threw to the dog. The dog did catch it and then returned it to, right? So that's what you're really saying. You're saying, the fully expanded sentence is the complete description of what you're agreeing to. Now you'll hear this in what they'll teach you in any successful communication and negotiation class, is that if you say something to me, I repeat it back in some form that demonstrates I actually do understand what you've said to me, right? So it's called reflection. You just want to reflect what the person says. It's amazing what you get out of people if you keep reflecting what they're saying. Their behavior will change immediately. And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, well, let's take that process of taking sentences and operationalizing them so that you've actually tested every step in them, right? So every step of the process. That's really all it is. I mean, who was it that said most of what we do is disambiguation? It was Bill, right? Bill was the big, almost everything we do is reducible to disambiguation. Well, what we're doing is removing ambiguity. One of you guys did a beautiful job the other day. I don't know who you were talking to. Might have been Tyler, about the copula and how dangerous
That was Martin.
that freaking word is, which is, are, was, were, etc. And because that word, that basically means sorta, maybe like.
Yeah,
So,
that was Michael with this insight.
oh, okay. So whenever you hear any use of the copula, you're like, okay, is this person making a description? Is this person making a narrative? Is this person making a fictionalism? Or is this person making a a rough equality? Is this person making an inflation? Or is this person making a conflation? Or is this person making a distraction and deceit? And you have that entire hierarchy to go through to. Whatever you hear the word is, are, was, were. And the thing is, that's such a helpful shortcut. Because I don't want to say, I want to say the cat's black. I don't want to say, I see a cat. Its fur appears black to me. If you look at this same cat and you observe its fur, it will appear black to you, I promise. Right? That's what a cat is black means. Right? If you fully span that sentence, I mean, nobody wants to talk like that.
Well,
Right?
I think it's sufficiently operationalized when you say I see a black cat.
Yes.
Everybody knows what that means. But that's the important distinction. You're already not claiming what is, but you're referring to your senses instead.
That's
You're
correct. Yeah.
what you're seeing, hearing, what you're thinking, feeling, not claiming like from God's perspective.
Right. That's the correct answer, is that the early critics of the copula were, it's God speak. Right? You're not God. You can only testify to what you can. God can say it is, but you can only say I see. So thank you, Martin, for that clarity. So really, why do we use it? We use it to test our our own knowledge. We use it to test the knowledge, the claims the others are making. And we do operationalism, which is we call it the method, right? It's just enumeration, the creation of a system of measurement by enumeration, serialization, operationalization to the point of disambiguation, right? We're just trying to create measurements that can't be misrepresented, whether you do it involuntarily or voluntarily. So it's basically, the reason I work with this stuff is because I have this very clear understanding of math and programming, right? Math is the operations aren't always stated, although they can be like addition, subtraction, multiplication, but not all operations are stated. They're just like cancellation, right? Cancellation. You can do most math by envisioning at a balanced scale, right? I'm going to do everything this way. Well, so in programming, you have to be very declarative in a sequential order. So it's like showing your work. Look, in math, you don't have to show your work, but in programming, you have to. And this is equivalent of showing your work, right? I mean, so when we're telling people to speak operationally, we're really saying, show me your work. Because then I can see if that you're, at the very least, you're showing what you know, that you know what you're saying, but more likely you're teaching me how to understand the same thing you are by the same means without making presumptions, which is what I can't remember who brought it up first, which is the problem of inference, right? A suggestion. I love this word, inference. I'm like, it makes me crazy because it's made me crazy since I was in 7th grade. But what that really means is suggestion. And suggestion is got a very different meaning. All right, what's the next one?
Number 7. Andrew Tate, what's the proprietarian solution to his antics and how do they violate P law?
I'm not really qualified to answer this. I don't know enough about the guy other than he seems to be inspiring a lot of people. And while it sounds like he's talking shite, very often he's not. He's just speaking, he's just preaching is probably the better method I would use. He's using the color of the discourse to teach something that's not necessarily false. So that's all I can say. I can't say anything else because I don't pay attention.
Well, I don't know everything that he's ever done, but his scam business would certainly violate P law.
It's what?
he baited women into posing on the internet for simps, and it's baiting into hazard of everyone. So women who have worked in his scam business may have been doing it voluntarily, but childless young women demonstrably aren't mentally mature and do not make decisions in their best long-term interests, and there's every reason why important decisions should be vetoed by parents at that point.
Yes.
But the issue concerns porn as a whole, which abuses instincts for seeking mates and reproducing for profit, while actually decreasing chance of attaining either of these and causing addiction.
You know, you could like teach this stuff, Martin. You're really good at this.
I'd like to think so, yes.
Excuse me, Brad, I forgot to tell you that we were running this meeting this morning and that I had to shift us by a half hour. I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
Thank you for showing up and adding laughter. You know, Martin is somewhat interesting to me because Martin is so I view you as relatively humble, which he will tell you isn't true. But
A ruse.
It's a ruse.
It was true at one point, and you seem to have missed that it's no longer true.
Anyway. Curse of competency. All right. So
We
so
do-
I think
I
Go
mean,
ahead.
we do teach measurement. So confidence is a word we use in measure.
yes.
So that's all I see is a measured confidence.
So you know, I know I'm going to tease Brandon. So Brandon, you know, you're profoundly comfortable being arrogant. in my
Yes.
opinion. Yeah.
I am.
Boy.
So Gabriel, how long have we got before we completely corrupt you?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I
Wait
judge
and
my
see.
efficacy by how fast we can move people from not being arrogant to being arrogant without saying.
That a lot.
You know who throws me is Jacob, because he sounds so soft and so kind and so nice when you talk to him, but then he delivers like this, the truth.
I'd like to make a point about the audience. They can't tell the difference between confidence and arrogance.
That's true.
So you might as well get out there and be accused, right? And then have a
Oh, I
conflict on your
see.
hands.
Very smart. Very smart. In other words, the conflict generated by the perception of arrogance instead of confidence, it creates an opportunity for the discussion.
Yeah, but
You know, you're pretty smart, Brandon. I don't know, you know.
I hope demonstrably. I'm waiting for imitators.
That's right.
the arrogance maybe you gotta keep the aura of accessibility in order to make sure in order to get imitators.
I use proximity for that.
Yes, I know you do that. All right. Who's joined? Ernesto, thank you for joining. Shane, good to hear from you always. All right. So I'd like to be able to say people who overdo it and get attention by which they, yeah, I guess Martin already made this point. My only argument with Tate is I don't like the Islam thing. I don't like the degree with which he has taken on I mean, I'd rather we lift women up than accept that they need to be down. And that bothers me about his piece. that probably is a moral conviction of mine. And I think that's because in the European tradition, that's what we've tended to do. We try to make our women competent, which is certainly true in the Scandinavian countries, because they had to be.
Well, it's a matter of making them competent in what they can be and not expect them to
Be competent outside of those spheres, correct? And so I don't like
Beautiful and innocent, right? And you don't cover them up because it's a show of your men's discipline in public for them to be a show of the beauty of your people.
right.
And any other way is a degradation of your people. You want to cover them up or not?
Well, I have heard so that women are the biggest enforcers of other women covering themselves up.
Yeah.
Just like they're enforcers of female circumcision.
They're bigger enforcers of social norms within the limits, within the proportional limits of that norm. And then when you hit the limits, the men step in.
It's so funny that all that woman's behavior is because of their empathy is really a derivation of, I don't want my offspring to be tempted to be like you. Right, and that's really that's where it comes from. But because they're empathic, that is gets by them. So they see it as an offense. And it's one of the many things that's kind of humorous when you ask women to explain something. They have no idea, really. They'll make up a story as to why they feel something is right or wrong, but the instinct is invisible to them. So I prefer not to have this. I don't like I'm okay with we need to mature women. I'm not okay with women are irredeemable. I guess that's my.
There he is.
Huh?
Francis showed up.
Francis is here.
My apologies.
Don't apologize. We are privileged to have your company. I had no idea we had so many good questions, or that these questions would be that good. These are amazing questions.
Quite a few of them showed up yesterday.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Quite a few of them showed up yesterday. Actually, the rest of them.
Wow.
People were just waiting for the last day to ask the questions.
They didn't want us to be able to prepare.
I did.
That's not
I
good.
have answers prepared for
Yeah.
every one of them.
That was the wrong. Thinking you're going to outwit Martin was the wrong effing theory.
And it's not in my habit to prepare.
It's not your habit. It's not your habit to. That's not true. It's not your habit.
I used to do homework before class every time.
Yes. All right. Okay, the next one. Could you define the concepts and explain the difference between capitalization and hyper-capitalization, and also consumption and hyperconsumption in the context of the masculine and feminine acquisition strategies? It's a great freaking question. Who's going to take that?
Oh, I can read my prepared answer. You
Yes.
can read it. I use
Brandon, you know why Brandon's doing this? Like, great, I got out of the work. That was I saw that, Brandon. I got out of the work. I could do that one, but great, I don't have to do it now.
I always give everyone the feedback, pat on the head.
Yes, you did something
job.
I don't have to.
By the way, Martin, I'm just going to highlight your answer in red so we distinguish from the questions.
Yeah, I don't actually answer in the document anyway. So I use hyperconsumption to refer to consuming even capital still usable for production, particularly intergenerational capital. Like think of boomers. Likewise, I use hyper-capitalization to refer to production of common, societal, and multi-generational capital. And what he's asking later is it's the same like cooperation. No, capitalization and cooperation aren't interchangeable. Capitalization means using resources to produce capital that can be used to simplify or unlock production and acquisition of other resources. It can also refer to via negativa effort, preserving the value of something by keeping something else out of it, such as keeping water or gene pool clean.
You're really good. Wow. I don't think I would have done that well. Anything I can add to it? The piece I want to add to it is that these are reproductive strategies, and therefore they're status seeking strategies. And so capitalization and hypercapitalization for the male are survival to reproductive strategies, because they basically teach us that status, which is demonstrated capacity for bearing responsibility for producing capital for the male, and status and the female is, it's going to sound horrible because it is, hyperconsumption is a measure of her ability to obtain status and therefore attention and mates by consuming capital that she did not produce. In other words, it means she's a sink, right? A consumption sink. So these are just evidence in our reproductive strategies, because a woman who can extract more resources, especially from males, for her children and her, will have a better survival chance than a woman who cannot. And so that's, I just wanted to add the status dimension to Martin's extraordinarily good description. Is there any way to make what women do not sound horrible? Look at Martin's face.
Well, I think so, but
Brad.
No, just don't talk about it.
What?
Just don't talk about it.
So it's success by evasion.
the problem is that every description we come up with will be compared to the fictional model of woman that we have now.
Yes.
It's not
It's
redistributed to children, it gets the women in trouble.
It's what?
If it's not redistributed to the children, it gets women in trouble.
Right. If it's being put into children, that's fine. Right. Especially being put into children and you're getting laid. I just said that to see how many smiles I could get, but there's some truth to it. So I think we answered that, right? They're not interchangeable. What makes plain old consumption to hyperconsumption? Martin answered that. It's when you're draining capital, or you're draining the ability to accumulate capital, right? Does the masculine strategy consist of just ordinary capitalization, or does it consist of more particularly hypercapitalization? Well, it's just a status. How high do you want to claim the status tree? If you want to compete for more status, then you'll try to accumulate more capital. I mean, what?
Yeah, I mean, if the man is only trying to benefit himself, then he may capitalize for his future, but hypercapitalization is what results when men start putting demands on each other and create duties.
That's right. No, Bart, you could teach this. You're really good at this.
Hopefully.
I'm trying to think of how to spin this to tease you some more, but I can't think of anything. All right. Gabriel, what do you think of this guy, Martin?
Taught me a whole lot of stuff, so pretty
Right.
thankful for that.
You're gonna let him get away with just a compliment? You can't give a flip side to it?
No, I think a compliment is pretty good.
I can take it.
Oh,
It's mutual, I think.
this is the, so would
Sort
you
of
rather, sorry, say again, Martin?
So it's mutual, I think, of Gabriel sort of as my protege, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah, similarities exist there.
So, would you rather have this kind of twisted humor in a staff meeting or at a public, would you rather be boring and serious? I kind of like the nonsense talk. It's very,
Yeah.
it's bonding. All right, what's the next one?
Even the nonsense makes sense here.
All right, number 9.
Oh, so there are more paragraphs to this question.
I think we answered them though.
Yeah, I had that answer.
About interchangeability between consumption and hyperconsumption.
Yeah, I think we answered that. Yeah, I think you weren't here.
My answers to Zer's questions are shorter than the question.
All right,
By several orders of magnitude.
I think I'm just confusing the answers to the questions because they're all the same color.
The answers
answers
are
up.
in the document. The document is all questions.
There's his answers are on another document.
I
His-
can
I
later
see.
if you want them there.
Got you. Yeah, it's just that question 8. I'm looking at question 8. It has 4 paragraphs.
Yeah, we went through it though.
Okay.
It may not be. Martin gave very condensed and profound answers there. What are we going to do with your answers, Martin? Are we going to publish them? Can we publish them?
Yeah, I can throw
I
them
think we
in.
should just add them in line, right? Just give it a different color, like red or blue or something.
Okay, so on number 9, is the Gini coefficient of wealth wealth inequality good, analogous to a measure of proportionality? Presumably, the wealth inequality is too high in a polity some individuals want it effect. Exactly. Progressives are more intolerant of wealth inequality when it's so defect at a lower value. Correct. Conservatives a higher value. Correct. Communists defect if the coefficient is at 0. This is a distribution of tolerance for inequality from left wing to right wing, so it's hard to measure. So, who can answer this one?
Well, I can again read my prepared answer, so it may not be complete.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to victimize Brandon. He's not letting me. All right, so go ahead.
Gini coefficient hides what the inequality resulted from, i.e. whether the rich elites acquired their wealth through productive contributions to society or parasitism. It further fails to compare their inequality to genetic inequality. As such, it's hard to consider it a good measure of anything at all, as these and various other conditions will produce vastly different results.
Correct. So, what we would say is that the reason for the present inequality is due to rent seeking at the top we've made possible through various forms of credentialism and financialism, and we have used immigration and offshoring to reduce the income of the bottom. And so, and what's happening is, of course, is that the taxes that are being extracted in order to pay for this, the sustaining whatever inequality exists, in other words, trying to resist it, are being extracted from the productive middle, who puts in the greatest value at the greatest cost. which is destroying the middle class. So our solution to inequality isn't to search for equality. It's to minimize, this has to put two things together. It's to minimize takings, right? Artificial inequality, to restore maximum equality. And it is to prevent profiteering by arbitrage, which impoverishes the bottom. So we're trying to, we try to remove bads and produce and limit ourselves to wealth production by goods. This should produce a natural equilibrium. Now, the second point is the one that Gabriel answered earlier, which is that we're insuring each other. What are we insuring each other about? Well, if we're insuring each other, are we subsidizing or are we insuring? And as long as we're only insuring and we're not subsidizing, redistribution is fine. But if we're subsidizing, redistribution isn't. The problem with the left is they want subsidy without reciprocity. They want to be given things without paying the cost of minimizing their burden. And this is an issue of self-regulation, but it's often an issue of status. So really what's happening with a lot of the angry left is their status is not something they're comfortable with, and they're just wrong. Right? They're just wrong. And so asking us
about what, their status or
their status. They don't like the fact that they believe they have greater value or contribution or intrinsic worth that they demonstrate by their actions. And in fact, that's the occupations they seek to fulfill. Is that without adversarial competition, that without testable results, and that without accountability. Basically, it's feminine, but that's what they seek to do. So if we instead view the left as an expression of the feminine, regardless of gender, right? Or on one hand, or the extreme feminine, which is infantilization, or what we see in they call it, it's when children throw tantrums. I mean, that's what a lot of this outrageous female behavior of screaming is, right? It's just a child's tantrum that hasn't been disciplined out of them. So those people are failures of maturity. We can fix that problem, some of it we can't. So the real answer here is that if you're bearing the responsibility you are capable of, even if we have to discipline you into that responsibility so that you're not exporting costs upon others, then we can ensure you.
That is exactly what they call fascism.
Right, exactly. They call fascism discipline.
The political arena, I would call that whole arena immature or childish. On the left are girls, on the right are boys.
Right.
And just relegate them to a lower space than we're working all the time. Those are the bread and circus people, and they're just playing
Right. So,
people who have emotions.
So here's the problem I have with the genetic determinism argument. Christianity and Islam do work. They actually do the job. It appears that Buddhism does the job. So it's not that these people can't be trained.
It makes the lower classes do no harm, but it doesn't drive them into the upper classes.
Right. Right. And so the problem is, go ahead.
Well, it's ironic that they argue against genetic determinism. Their rejection of any training whatsoever makes genetic determinism even more important.
Yes. You just ruined my day again, Martin.
You're welcome.
God. It's so painful. Oh, Brad, we even got a giggle out of you on that one. You're
You're muted.
You're
I
muted.
was laughing.
We even got a laugh out of you on that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was so good and so painful. I forgot what we were talking about.
Sorry.
Wasn't the
What?
question about proportionality specifically?
Yes.
Okay,
It was the inequality index as it relates to whether that measures proportionality,
The
no,
Gini index
no,
right?
failed.
Obviously, it doesn't, but
it doesn't. You're right. It doesn't.
Yeah.
That's because you're a smart guy and you know these things.
I would say it more so measures how far apart we are. But to measure proportionality, you gotta actually look at are people getting what they need to survive, I guess, or to produce their own sovereignty.
Right.
Well,
like-
what they need not to defect. So of course, they could start demanding more and more not to defect. So there has to be a limit on the other side that we might rather get rid of you than
Right.
pay you.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is what ostracization comes from, right? That's what it means. It's you vote people out of the polity. There's no reason we can't vote people out of citizenship. I mean, can you write that down, Martin? We should vote people out of citizenship. Let's put that in. Let's actually put that in there.
Certain places in
just a court jury?
Switzerland to have that thing.
Isn't
More
that just a
religious
jury of your
do it.
peers, or a jury in a court?
Excuse me, I didn't hear that. Shane, say that again.
Voting out of citizenship, isn't that like going to a criminal court where they're accusing you and the jury votes on that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Did we answer that one? So can you ask your question again? Where'd it go? Is it Shane? Yeah. I just want to make sure I got closure on it. You phrased the question as something about proportionality.
Oh, I think whoever this was trying to say that an equality index may be measuring proportionality, or I guess the
Makes
No.
proportionality
measure of
more
poverty might be
difficult.
better, but it's not.
Proportionality is more difficult.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
more different your people are, it's
Mhm.
harder to intuit. And the Gini coefficient, while it's not a good measure, it correlates with violence. Meaning
Mhm.
it's proximity and difference that proximity creates violence enough times as it is. People are violent to their own family because they're close to them. They're
Right.
they're the apes around you, but make it different apes and then put them together and stack them. You are in trouble.
So inequality is more. So the Gini coefficient is measuring two causal axes that conflate. The one that Brandon just mentioned, which is compatibility, right? The ability to integrate and cooperate. And the other one is rent seeking, which is the failure to implement a sufficient rule of law that you've prohibited rents. The way we generally prohibit rents, which is one of my first pieces that I contributed, was that what happens when you create a state or government is you centralize rent seeking in order to suppress local rent seeking. Local rent seeking reduces transaction costs. It increases economic velocity, which then turn those taxes into actual profits. In other words, those taxes are actually earned profits if you're suppressing it. The problem is that now you've got central ability to engage in rent seeking. You now have to use the courts and the law to suppress, right? And unfortunately, governments are really good because they're monopolies, unless you have an independent judiciary. And unless you have the common law, frankly, it's extremely difficult to suppress rent seeking at the government level and at any of the talking classes. It's really hard to rent seek in production. It's really easy to do so in finance academy, theology, and state, because they're all promissory rather than demonstrated behaviors. All right, so the Gini coefficient, I think we want to summarize that as, it's not a bad measure of the
Relative inequality.
relative inequality, but it doesn't mean that, I mean, you could have relative inequality just because of your population distribution in your economy. Is that some people are able to perform in the white collar economy internationally, and they're going to be just wealthier than people who can't. The problem is when it's extractive. In other words, it's the via negativa that we need to suppress. It's not the inequality that's the problem. It's any irreciprocity that's appearing in inequality. Gabriel, does that make sense? I was watching you. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, number 10. It's about a race question.
I think that one's sort of specifically for me because that's where you got the claim from.
Yes.
You've probably heard this. I should read the question.
Try to speak loudly, boss.
The question: I've heard of insinuations that the institute political prescriptions amount to racist liberalism. How is more liberalism going to resolve the crises Western nations face if it is the same ideology or political framework responsible for bringing them about? How are you all more than just racist liberals? Here by racist, I mean race aware and so on. Answer. You've probably heard this from me, used somewhat ironically, given that we prioritize rule of law over any authority and attempt to fix the holes in the system designed by American founding fathers, which is what term classical liberalism is typically retrospectively used for, rather than completely throwing that system away. I think it's fair to say that we continue within that tradition. Racist liberalism in particular is a term used within dissident right for those that don't think liberalism was in itself a problem. It just cannot work with all those other races here. We do, however, clearly differ in acknowledging and fixing various other problems of that system, including those that dissident right considers inherent to liberalism.
Yes, boy, that was a very sophisticated answer, though. So let's break it down. I know there's a couple of meanings to liberalism. One is the rule of law. The second is participatory government. The third is Republican government, which is a combination of rule of law and whatever. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the last property was nationalism. And that's been taken out in the post-war period. So, so when they're criticizing liberalism, the way I tend to use that term is in the original meaning, which is that we're looking for rule of law in a Republican government with some degree of participation, in other words, veto power, right? And that the reason I do that is it creates a market for cooperation at all scales of the polity and prohibits authority or irreciprocity at all scales of the polity. So in other words, it's a method of falsification at the political scale. In other words, there's no justice, it's just pure falsification. It doesn't tell us what we should do or what we must do. It only tells us what we must not do. Anything that isn't prohibited is therefore possible in those markets for exchange between the sexes, classes, and polities. That's all it says. Now, this basically means that we all have to figure out how to cooperate with each other to get anything done. So if you look at, for example, I'll take somebody I don't criticize very often, and I would say, what's his name? Geostrategist,
Here's on.
Zion.
Weinhagen. Peter Weinhagen, he says, well, the European governments are designed to govern, i.e. rule, and our government is designed to debate, i.e. cooperate. And this is true. So when you say, what's wrong with liberalism? Our position would be, with the liberalism and meaning rule of law, Republican government under, which is markets, with political participation. We would say that at any time, the ability to innovate in crimes is just as available to us as the ability to innovate in goods. And so what we do is we try to remove the ability to innovate in crimes by exhaustively producing a science of criminality and putting it into the Constitution so that liberalism is strong enough to resist future attempts. Furthermore, we've maintained the common law and on top of that science, which means we can incrementally suppress new innovations in criminality as they occur, rather than make a declarative statement now, given our knowledge. And so we've produced an evolutionary model that uses the science of continuously falsifying, in other words, eliminating methods of irreciprocity, but not telling us what we must do or should do with once we've created an environment of markets for reciprocity. So it's pretty, when I say we have a science of cooperation, I'm not kidding. But that science of cooperation is actually a science of prohibiting non-cooperation or those incentives not to cooperate, which is irreciprocity. So we've produced the via negativa form of government, which is rule of law that prohibits it. That's what we've done. And whereas most governments in history have create a via positiva form of government where people do, but that just means you've created a new forum for people to innovate in means of extraction, corruption, crime, and irreciprocity, rent seeking, and free riding. So every time you anchor yourself in something that's certain, what you do is you create new opportunities for crime. Yet if you anchor yourself in what you may not do, you can continuously outlaw new crimes, but you're not told what to do. You have to discover and agree on it. And so that's what we do. So if you're saying, the problem I have is when people use these words and they don't know what they mean, and so they're too ambiguous, and so they conflate different things in them. And we're like, is this a continuation of liberalism? Well, sort of. Liberalism was really
liberalism. They think that liberalism means permissiveness,
right,
where it means permissiveness inside the law, inside of markets.
Right.
You're free to choose, but inside the limits of those things.
Right. And so there are holes in our laws. They're going to even once we do what we've done, which is pretty profound. I mean, this group has done amazing work on the law. Once we've plugged all those holes, it doesn't mean somebody's not going to invent a new way of being a scumbag. Right? We've just provided a system of measurement for saying what scumbaggery is. And we've done it at such a granular level. It's like we have the periodic table of elements for lying. I mean, it's cheating and scheming. I mean, we've done an exhaustive job of documenting the science of irreciprocity. We just flip it around and say it's positive, right? That's what we do. We speak about it positively, but it's really a science of the prohibiting of irreciprocity. So So in that sense, we've created the maximum opportunity for future cooperation and growth and the minimum friction. And we've hopefully produced a system of government that has the greatest duration possible. In other words, I mean, the English system is already ancient, right, by government standards. But we should be creating the closest thing to the science of cooperation, because it's actually the science of the suppression of irreciprocity that prohibits cooperation.
You can only justify justice.
Yes, yes, yes. So, when people ask this question, it's a great question, right? It's a great question, but I don't know, what question are they answering? Because if their answer is historical context, that's just whatever is morally objectionable to them thrown into this bucket called liberalism. Whereas I don't know, I just use rule of law. Rule of law now was classical liberalism moral? Well, was it really that smart? I think it was until the French Revolution, because the French are what created liberalism, not the English.
Well, liberalism didn't exist before French Revolution.
That's right.
Understanding that liberalism was created in response to excesses of both French Revolution and Napoleon.
Correct. Thank you. So when you get into this discussion, it's like we're talking about English common law and natural law, right? And the English creation of markets for cooperation by the gradual process as each group gained the ability to produce enough to hold responsibility for production. So when I look at at classical liberalism, I'm like, well, I don't even know what that, I say that because the best word I have, but what I'm really saying is we're a rule of law, Republican, participatory government is what we're advocating for, right? And we're only doing that because we're trying to create the maximum number of markets with the greatest suppression of reciprocity. There's greatest opportunity for the good with the least opportunity for the bad. So when they say things that are bad about modernity, what's current, those are due to 6 holes. Most of the guys on this list can either call off the top of their heads or go look it up really quickly and discover what they are, right? Remember what they are. But they're just really well-known holes in our Constitution that if we plug, we move closer and closer. What we've done here is plug those, plus put that science in place so that it's easier to plug any hole that emerges in the future. So I don't know. So somebody ask the question again, because I've lost the context of the question.
The question says, I've heard insinuations that the Institute's political prescription amount to racist liberalism, and here in quote, by racist, I mean race aware, as in not eschewing the considerations of race within society, and not in accusatory and
Got it. Let me cut it. So yeah. This is easy thing. Have you heard me criticize? We criticize religions, right? We criticize sexes. We criticize our own factions. We criticize races. We criticize classes. So why is the person that's asking this question pulling out races as the thing we're criticizing? We're not. We're just saying, well,
this is an established term in dissident right for
right.
Those that are trying to sort of resurrect liberalism just with awareness of
Correct.
these topics.
Correct. So all we're trying to say is there's incompatibilities between all of these groups. Some of these incompatibilities are resolvable through exchanges, men and women, right? But some of these incompatibilities, if they're broad enough, can never be resolved within the same polity, only in separate polities. And the reason being is two races whose demographic distributions are large enough will produce a racial hierarchy that is intolerable for the people who are at the bottom. All we're saying is if you have your own polity, then we can cooperate by trade, but we don't have to have the same norms, traditions, institutions, and values internally. Why? Because what's the difference between the races? Which is what I get beat up before all the time, right? The difference between the races is simply neotonic evolution and class size. It means that we basically, I mean, we know this very simple. Take an Asian baby and you put it in the crib and you newborn and you mess with it, it doesn't care. You take a white baby, put it in there, it cares a little bit. You take a Hispanic or a Latin baby, you put it in there, it cares a little bit more. You take a black baby and you mess with it and it cares even more. So it's just neotonic evolution is a form of, we call it aggression, but it's dominance expression. And so what happens to dominance expression that can't be expressed or is countered all the time? It's frustrating at the brainstem level. So we're asking people who need to be in social environments where they can be happy, fulfilled, people who have the same instincts and intuitions as they do, and who can therefore develop institutions and procedures and processes and norms and traditions that suit their developmental curve. I mean, what's the difference between 60-year-old people of every race? Not a whole lot. Why? Because we've exhausted our maturity cycle. What's the difference between the races when they're in grade school? A hell of a lot. I mean, my kid grows up in the Microsoft world, right? Which is Asian, Indian, white, and then everybody else, right? It's basically that thing. Well, my kid is a typical white kid, right? He's going to have less tolerance for he's going to be very intolerant of disorder. The Indian kid is going to be a little more tolerant, and the Asian kid's going to be a lot more tolerant. That's just because we have different maturity cycles. So why fight it? Why put kids in the same thing and make some group that has the higher dominance expression, higher aggression, faster maturity? Why put that kid in a room where he's always wrong? It's cruel. Why put him in an economy where he's always inferior? It's cruel. Why put him in a polity where his political actions always lose? It's cruel. So I would say stop being cruel to each other. Make separate polities and then cooperate if you need to by trade.
Curt, how does tolerance for disorder relate to different degrees of neoteny?
Oh my God, do you really want me to? That's a brilliant question. That's going to take me an hour. It's
okay. Maybe I'll save it for next time.
It's a brilliant question, though. So how did you say it?
How does tolerance for disorder relate to different degrees of neoteny?
Two things. Dominance expression turns into a time reference sooner. And the second thing is that neoteny extends cooperation, so pliability, basically learning. And so it's sort of like the intelligence thing. People who are intelligent can be more patient because they can see more futures. Whereas people who are less intelligent can see fewer futures because they can see fewer opportunities and permutations. So if you take that person and now you make that person have a faster growth curve and a higher time preference, you're going to get more aggression and response to. I mean, did I do a good enough job in that short description to give?
So are you saying that higher neoteny is higher tolerance for disorder?
It's higher.
Lower.
So it's slow. Say again. Who said that?
Higher neoteny, is that higher or lower tolerance for disorder?
It's lower. Well, it depends. You can only be. That's why I said it's going to take me an hour. You could only be tolerant of that which you perceive. Right. So does that make sense? You can you're trying to, we can't make we can't make an equivalency that doesn't exist. All we can do is say, okay, this is a checklist. What is this person being annoyed by? What's his intelligence? What's his neotenic development? What's his age, right? And what's his aggression? And what you'll find is this tends to be reaction time to status and position. See, I told you, this is like an hour-long discussion, and I'm trying to get over with this so I can, so let's get through
The more
question.
childlike, the
Huh?
lower your threshold for aggression. The more childlike, the lower your threshold for aggression.
But the more the more perception you have of disorder, the lower your tolerance for disorder. So you have, it's again, as most things, evolution needs something to calculate against. So it's the two spectrum. So this, go ahead.
What you mentioned previously is that Indians are more tolerant of disorder than whites, and Asians more tolerant than Indians.
Yes.
So from this, there appears to be no relationship with neoteny.
Okay.
It's not interpersonal anymore. It's at scale.
Yeah, I don't know if that's, that's not
Indians are clearly less neotenous than whites, and Asians are by far the most.
right. That's I told you this is an hour-long conversation. We've only got a couple of questions left, and it's
I will just seed this question for next time.
so this is
So
we
we
can
have
make
the
a
proper
whole
time.
series. We can make a whole, because you're talking now. You've added another dimension, Martin. So I mean, I was like, okay, I was just trying to, all right. That's the problem. He's like, it's a great question. It's really interesting, but it's better if you start out with what we usually do, which is a list of dimensions, and then explain them rather than encounter every dimension as an objection.
Well, disorder means every marketplace, right? When the affects each market different, your response to a change in capital differently.
Yes, exactly. All right. So can we bench that one, and we'll do that next week because that's a fascinating topic. What's the next one?
From Gary, and that one's directly for you, so I didn't prepare an answer.
Given the proposals by Curt Doolittle on federal and several state taxes, what is his reasoning behind his tax reforms, and why doesn't Curt believe a tax on all monetary and economic transactions? Blah, 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 blah. Yes, I know. Ernesto added question. Ernesto, I know you're on here, aren't you? Are you on here? Yes. Hard questions. So this is actually a really easy question to answer. It just counterintuitive. What's the worst tax in the world? Value-added tax. Why do they have it in Europe? Because it's a bunch of countries next to together that are trading all the time, and so everybody's trying to get their piece rather than get a piece that moves on. Because if they didn't do VAT, well, what happened is whatever country sold the thing would get all the tax income from it. So it basically, Germany collect all the taxes for Europe. And so that's where VAT comes from. It's actually a really bad tax. Why? Is because it distorts the pricing system. What you would theoretically like is for every single step, right? I mean, for producing a laptop most of us are working with includes a phenomenal number of parts, each of which requires a phenomenal number of subcomponents, each of which requires a phenomenal number of different resources, each of which have to be produced by a phenomenal number of. So like the joke on this is I pencil and I hamburger, right? Nobody actually knows how to produce a pencil. It's a really simple thing, but the knowledge of doing so is distributed. Well, then a hamburger, even if you know how to produce everything in a hamburger, you can't produce them at the same time in the same environment because it requires products from a worldwide distribution over across different seasons. right? So now the same thing has to do with pretty much anything, is that look at the computer we're on, and I actually know how the CPUs actually work on this. I mean, I know what at a fundamental level is, right? But you start adding all the different technologies that are in here up, and how many places, it's just a lot of distributed knowledge. The example I use in construction is that we have architects, engineers, we have lead developers, and we have subcontractors who deal with different expertise. The people I didn't mention were the suppliers. It turns out that that's who has the knowledge. So, because they're the ones who are in the business of selecting what to sell to the market that they understand, which consists of all of the subs in this particular area. I had a blast working on this problem, by the way. It was absolutely one of the more fascinating problems, because I realized that the only money that's made in lumber is in the delivery charges to your house. And the only money that's made in building construction is in the lawsuits that come after resolving differences. And once you realize that's all that's going on, then it's the fact that anybody does anything in this business is an insanity, right? So, but anyway, so there's a very complex network of things going on. Now, if we have a lot of taxes at all these levels, what they do is interfere with the pricing system. The most common example is the labor arbitrage problem. We have people in other countries doing labor that Americans could do, but at higher prices, which would drive up our prices of goods. It would, but would also drive down our external costs of social unrest, political unrest, political and economic frustration, and all these bowling alone problems. So how much of what we're experiencing now in the male-female asymmetry of income in their 20s, which is when we would prefer people getting established and married, is due to not using IQ testing, not allowing IQ testing in business, thereby mandating the need for a degree in order to get filtered into a job, despite the fact that your degree probably has no influence on your career whatsoever. And what happened, and the fact that we've outsourced so much industrial work and the knowledge, and by outsourcing that industrial, we've outsourced the knowledge that would emerge from doing the industrial work in incremental innovation. So is it really cheaper to outsource? Microsoft paid my company, I don't remember how much money, back in the day, to actually see whether they were losing money or making money on outsourcing overseas. Turned out they were losing money, which they didn't like very much, because having their work outsourced to certain countries allows them to negotiate with those countries on maintaining the price in those countries and prohibiting some sort of stealing. So it gave them negotiating power. But so that was the external way they made up for the fact that outsourcing was a bad idea.
Curt, back then, did you take into account what you just discussed, right? The fact that outsourcing, for example, allowed Microsoft to negotiate with the Chinese government on pricing. So in other words, did you take all those factors into full account and it still came out negative?
No, because you can't measure it. We can just say that this is what's going on.
Hmm.
Also, this was, what year was this? It's 2004 or 5, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So it was quite a while ago. So it's, the clock's been ticking. But we were surprised. We were kind of more than surprised at how bad it was. Now, you've worked with software teams, right? If communication is a problem,
Oh yeah,
with a guy
I work on both sides of the ocean.
So I had to rescue a fairly well-known project at Microsoft a couple of times, right? And one of them was can you please go to India and fix this? Which is fine because you get paid an enormous amount of money because the incentive is there, right? They only come to you for that reason because you're one of the people that can solve it, right? It's not like you have to go bid on this work. They come to you and say, can you please go solve this effing problem for us? So, and back then, India was still in that phase of telling you everything is okay, everything is nice. I don't know if you know about this, but it was a horrible thing in the early 90s, the early 2000s, late 90s, is that they would always be positive, except that it might be that nobody's showing up to work at all. Right. Which you know what the rate of teachers not showing up in India is 50%.
Wow.
Imagine what that does to education. 50% of your teachers only show up 50% of the time. So that's probably changed by now, but so what was the question again? Where we are? Believe a tax.
About taxing financial transactions.
So I don't want to tax anything that imposes an cost or an incentive. Like one of the things that bothers me is running a company is I have to make business decisions based on the tax implications. I don't want to make decisions based on the tax implications. I prefer you tax my profits, but I don't want to have it be, they have to actually be profits. So, and then you have all these goofy games you have to play, like with, when I give somebody a bunch of stock options, why is that a tax? I don't understand taxing anybody until there's a realization. In other words, whenever cash is in your hand. So I look at the economy and I'm like, I know this drives people nuts, but what I'd really like to see is that we were just taxed on the end result, which sounds really counterintuitive because they're saying, well, I prefer a progressive tax. Well, why? Because, it's way easier to make $1 million once you have $1 million than, or $1 billion once you have $1 billion than it is to, it's pretty hard. But what I would like to do is get as much taxation out of the lower middle, the working lower middle and middle classes as possible, and as much of it into net profit somewhere that's being produced without interference in the pricing system.
How are people going to tax anything but that which made a profit?
What?
How could you tax anything but that which made a profit? Taxing anything.
Well, that's not
back.
Again, that's a fee, right? So the answer is that's exactly my question, is that there are plenty of profits, right, to tax, right? The question is, do we tax them that causes interference that costs people jobs, especially jobs at the low end? Because I've paid $1 million in taxes, right? Makes you fucking pissed off, right? I mean, it really does, right? So, but I would rather, when I say, well, I mean, I actually have it to pay.
It should also come along with the recognition. If you pay the most taxes, aren't you supposed to be like high stats?
So we should have public rules that show these people paid a lot of taxes. We'd be walking around talking to the rich people like, thank you. Right.
I think the Romans did that. They published the list of taxpayers in our polity.
That's where I got it from. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Because it creates basically a nobility. And it gets rid of this nonsense. Like, why do women not know they spend 70% of money and consume 80% of government resources? Yet they say they're paid unequally when they're not. They just don't work as much. Now, I mean, how is that? Why would that be? Why is it that white men over 35, well, it's not just white men, I mean, white and Asian men and Indian men and stuff now today, but basically.
It's okay, right? You don't have to include me there.
Well, I wasn't just for you. It's because I didn't want to be overstating the case and be accused. You want to say something, Brad?
Don't forget the white Asian men. I was born in Japan.
Yes,
Anyway.
the honorary whites.
But you look at the, well, that's the thing, right? Nobody complains about whites and Asians because we're not a problem. Right?
A lot of people complain, actually.
Well, okay, fine, you know. You're killing me. So, you know, and you know, Indians are certainly doing a hell of a, they're having a hell of a run in the US, so too, so. But Asians is a higher culture. I don't want to say this too rudely, but Asian culture is a higher culture than Indian culture. So it has a better, a more responsible understanding of the world. So, but in any event, what was I trying to get to? So what I don't want, what I was trying to make the example of is that, look, people here that pay tax, why if the guy who works all day with his body, right, that his body's gonna give out by 50, why is he paying the same taxes as my ass sitting in this fucking leather chair moving money around? When my body's not going to give out, well, in my case it might, but in most people's cases, it's not going to give out. You know, I'm not going to be walking around with a crooked back and whatever. So it just doesn't seem right to me that we're doing that. If you look at the data, a lot of people who pay taxes, net contribution is around 3%. We don't even need, there's no point in even charging it. But why do we even ask them to fill out tax returns? I mean, it's completely pointless. Yeah, you know, some of these people end up in tax courts. Well, I mean, of course they do. So it's not like I think, well, tax the rich. It's like, well, you know, if I'm making all this money, especially on financialism, right? I mean, fine, I'm happy to pay it, right? But I want recognition for it. I want public recognition that it's me that's done this, not the government. And I want the government to spend it wisely, and that's fine. But this whole thing of this, like, outshoring jobs, taxing labor, people who are in the labor pool, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. And then here in Connecticut, which is my favorite state to insult for justifiable reasons, other than, I mean, between California and Connecticut, you could basically find everything to insult the government about. But I mean, the government employees basically eat all the taxes. And you know what? All the taxes aren't produced by government employees who are in Hartford. They're produced down in the financial sector next to New York and Greenwich and Stamford, which is driving distance from New York, because those people escaped New York so they could escape taxes, New York taxes. So I mean, now Connecticut's got this problem of everybody who can leave does, because the government employees have absorbed all the tax revenue and benefits. So it's like, it's basically the same problem they have in any socialist government. So anyway, so my goal with taxes is to eliminate any friction and maximize any profit output. In other words, maximize profits to maximize taxes from profits, rather than maximizing transaction costs along the way. Does that mean we're going to get rid of every other tax? No. It means that in general, that's what we should do, is strive to eliminate falsehoods, right? And what is a falsehood? Anything that imposes a transaction cost that impedes the production of profits for the benefit of all. Does that make sense? Did I answer that question? Yeah, I'll tell you something. He says, well, you know, if there's 128 worth of payments in the United States. Well, sure. But if you say, I want to get 4 trillion out of that, what's going to be the impact?
You slow down the monetary velocity.
Right, a lot. You know, that's why I support the Bitcoin strategy, is because we want the least transaction cost possible. Like if you do a deal that includes a bank, they take a chunk. Are they actually doing anything for that? It's all insured by the government.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand, there's no value in it. So that's why I believe in the digital currency. If you want to know why the other reason I care about digital currency is two more, is that I want the government to possess the knowledge to eliminate the taxes that were interferences and only tax the profits. And I can only do that if I have enough visibility into the economy to do that. The same for the opposite side is that I want people at the bottom to be banked. In other words, to have access to financial services. And the debanking is really hard on people. You know what it costs to do a check cashing service? It's horrific. So we want people to be able to pay in cash, basically in disposable cash, as often as possible. So I look at the entire system and I'm like, well, I understand a lot of libertarian feelings of offense, but the practical reality is that transaction costs are like lies. They're not, they don't add to anything. They're actually hugely distortive. And the big distortion we have today, of course, is labor arbitrage. It's one thing to have resource problems, like we can't get cobalt, so these poor effers in Africa die getting the stuff, right? It's one thing to do that. It's another thing if something's highly polluting, like some of the stuff China refines. The rare earth minerals aren't rare.
Rare earth minerals.
Yeah, they're not rare. They're just toxic to get out.
Just
toxic as hell. So those are two great examples. But I mean, when you're just paying somebody to make sneakers cheap, but what you're doing in exchange is also depriving people of the income necessary to buy them if they were local. What you'd end up with is we'd start lowering this difference between American costs and world costs, and we'd get wealthier that way too. So, everything sounds simple if you solve the first step in an equation. but it doesn't actually solve the problem.
So, Curt, two follow-up questions for me. Well, actually, one of them is probably more like a addendum. So I think one thing you forget about a complete digital cash system or digital payment system is it also allows better tracking of economic activities so that we can actually set a proper price on money rather than the 6 months delay by the Fed.
Right, exactly.
Based on incomplete data, and then they always do too much.
They
always break something.
They always overshoot either direction.
Right. Because in theory, if everything is actually tracked on a ledger, right, all the economic transaction, or at least close to all, because you can never get all of them, then we can then figure out what is the actual monetary velocity and expand the money supply. What is the actual economic activity, right? What's a true economic activity, and expand the money supply as needed.
Right. One of my thank you for that. That was exactly correct. One of my problems is called the neutrality of money. It's like, well, they say, well, money is sort of neutral, but it's not neutral. The people that say money isn't, in other words, if I inflate the economy, that's going to show up all over the place, right? Right. The thing is, it shows, it doesn't all show up all over the place. Some of it shows up all over the place. Other of it disappears into niche little cracks and crannies of the economy that didn't create a neutral effect of money, right? So the point you're making is that the point I want to make on top of what you're saying is that's the reason that happens is because of the time delay. So
also the proximity to the source of the money printing, right? I mean, the one reason why real estate and all these asset market just went us to roof during COVID period, at least based on my understanding, is because the banks and these money changers essentially closer to the source of money printing. So if you imagine a pyramid of wine glasses, with the money coming up from the top, that top few tier gets most of it. By the time
Right.
it gets trickled down to the very bottom to the working stiffs, you don't have a lot.
So let's flip it around, and that's what the Singapore method of public services helps solve a little bit. But the other thing I like is I'm not actually against this whole thing. Give people $1,000 this month in a crisis. It doesn't seem to be a negative. The problem today is it all ended up in the banks. Whereas we wanted it to do is end up in spending. Well, the thing is that if we had that information you're talking about, we'd be able to give people. I don't want to get to what do they call it? Minimum income? What's
Universal base
Yeah.
income.
Yeah, that's never going to work. But as
that just inflates. I mean, that's money printing. That just inflates.
It's like I said. It's so great. You're getting all that money's going to end up in rents and mortgages, right? It's just going to go to the financial sector. UBI is it's just a redistribution of the financial sector through people by increased rents and mortgages. So, or even things like just basic necessities. Whereas if you say to people, there's a correction that we've got to go through, and here's some money to pay down bills. My favorite thing is always pay down mortgages and rents, right? In other words, take care of mortgages and rents, and you solve most economic problems in any time, and by reducing the debt load, and it's basically no cost, right? It's no cost to anybody. So I would prefer that sort of thing, or mortgages, rents, and food, right? I mean, and that's one of the things that digital currency allows us to do, is allowed us to give mortgage money, rent money, food money on a card that can only be spent certain ways. And so what we're really talking about is the banking system, like the financial system, tends to be extractive of people because it's an artificial distribution system that's no longer necessary. And it was real cash, it was needed, but it's just not real anymore. All right, have we answered that question? I think so.
Well, I forgot my addendum question to this is then, does that mean, so see, if we purely tax the profits, does that mean the ordinary working people, they wouldn't have any income tax, because unless they run a business and actually generate profits, they're just working for the business generating profits. So
Right.
businesses will pay tax, and then your workers will just get to keep everything.
No, it can't. We have to have income tax at some level, because fundamentally, at some point, people are making use of capital that isn't theirs. Does that make sense? They're profiting from capital that they are responsible for, but that they didn't actually own directly. And so that's a very sophisticated concept. I'm afraid if I just threw that out there, but what we're trying to do, we're saying is, look, if my body is my only capital and I'm burning my body,
Sure.
I don't want to be taxing you.
But if I'm working on Microsoft, I'm actually leveraging the capital available in the company to make profit, then I am actually using somebody else's capital.
Correct. And so that's a commissionable. In other words, the order created by the government is Andrew Tate has entered the waiting room. I don't believe that ought to be interesting. So anyway,
It's going to tell you that you're now the third type brother.
Someone's going to taste me. I thought that was hysterical. I mean, I would be so out of my element in that crowd. It would be all I would do is be laughing the entire time, because I mean, these guys are really good at what they do, and there's just no way that their ability to own me would
hello?
I'm trying to figure out who that is.
That seems to be Andrew Tate.
Bombing.
Yeah, you might want to kick that individual out.
Well, I have to.
Martin, you look like Johnny Sins.
The four
And
people.
maybe this
four new
individual
people.
too.
Well, we could just permanently mute them. Fortunately, this system isn't as good as. I don't see anybody causing any trouble anymore.
Okay, shall we continue?
1 second. Have to get rid of people. Have to get rid of people and report them. All right. Who is Jimmy Jordan and who is Jimmy Jordan?
Okay.
Okay, I think I got rid of him.
I think somebody leaked this link to the public or deliberate troublemakers.
Well, that's okay. I mean,
Well, Curt leaked it to the public.
they can watch the videos. Maybe we've learned something already. And
These
that it's better to
weird.
collect
What-
questions
which
and
was-
answer them
These people are weird.
than it is to make it possible for people to enter. Because they're mostly kids. All right. Anyway. The Tate thing would be, I just can't imagine. I mean, I would get first of all, I'd be laughing the entire time. Right? Because there's just no way. I just would find it absurd. But anyway, Martin, you would do well in that group, wouldn't you? All right. So did I answer the question?
Mhm.
Yes. Only 2 left. Francis, what are the next 2 questions?
So question 12, explain continuous
Cold.
recursive.
Oh no,
gene
it was
equation.
nice and warm in Chipotle when Luke was working at fucking Chipotle before he flew across the Atlantic to live with his fucking millionaire cousins.
What the heck?
Going to a Ferrari, 2 days in a fucking tent, you're crying your eyes out. You're not gonna fucking die. Stop crying.
Okay,
Cold.
I gotta admit that was fun.
I'm going to fucking heaven, fix the clouds. Fuck you. It's cold. So what? What we call we have a fucking straightener, you dickhead.
Oh, I got rid of the wrong one.
It's so fucking cold. Go out to the fucking cold right now. I'll knock you out fucking cold, you cunt. Shut the fuck up. I'm not even cold.
All I can say is that was fun.
I think he renamed himself to Brand to now to Brad to mask himself as others.
Yeah, he changed his name again now.
All right, well, it's not there. Anyway, that was fun. All right, so I mean, at least if they're gonna crash the party like that, it was entertaining. I mean, that could have been.
Did you kick out Francis?
Oh yeah.
Somebody tell Francis we want him back. All right. Explain continuous recursive no, next week. Is the Institute planning on meeting sometime this fall? Yes, we're discussing the staff meetings, follow the staff meetings.
Stop asking about the Tesla. Who's this dickhead? What do you think about the Roadster Tesla? What do you think about the Roadster Tesla? What do you think about the Roadster Tesla? Oh, what do you think about the Roadster? Are you jerking off? No one gives a shit about the Roadster Tesla. Fuck off. I don't like cars, electric cars. You know why the Tesla isn't a real man? Any man with a Tesla, I could kick the living fuck out of. I don't like Teslas. They're for bitch men. The environment, and I plug it in.
He had the Bradley whirl.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
You got the correct one.
Well, I could. There's no way to tell.
Francis.
Tell him to join back in. It was an accident. Can somebody tell Brandon to have him log back in? Not Brandon. Francis. All right, so what's our opinion of this? First of all, I enjoyed these questions. These were good. If it wasn't for the last few minutes here, which have been entertaining, it would have been pretty useful. Does everybody agree? Or no?
Yeah.
Would you say this was value added?
The
Gabriel,
last few minutes?
no, aside from the last few minutes.
Oh yeah, definitely. The rest is pretty good. Yeah.
All right, so Martin, you?
Yeah. Francis is saying he can join back.
That's okay. We're gonna
Right,
shut
it's
down
the-
anyway.
Okay.
Brandon, you're gonna say yes. Brad, what did you think?
Absolutely.
Yep.
I enjoyed it greatly.
All right, so I'm gonna end the meeting and we'll upload it as our Q&A. I'll cut off the first 20 minutes where we were all trying to figure out how to get in here. And I'll cut off the last few minutes. Although I kind of enjoyed it, to be honest with you. That was kind of a great way to end the day. But what that tells us is that the proper forum is to collect questions ahead of time. We can live stream, but we can't have people participate, right?
Restrain it to the private groups at least.
Yes.
Or do you want to only post that link to Twitter Circle, maybe?
Yes.
So that way, only
I think-
those of us who should actually be in a meeting like this are joining.
I think those messages are actually visible. It just limits
I
who
agree.
can participate in them. So that wouldn't help.
I think there's somewhere it's visibility too.
All right. Well, I thought that was great. It went way longer than possible. Now I've got to go. I'm way late for Dr. Brad. So I'm going to go switch and do some work with Dr. Brad. Thank you all. Let's call this a victory. I'll edit this up and send it out. Bye-bye.
Bye.